said that Ukraine, for its part, reiterated its focus on achieving an immediate ceasefire and a pathway to substantive diplomacy, adding that another round of talks on Friday between the teams is possible but not yet planned. For more, we'll cross now to our correspondent, Jasper Mortimer in Istanbul. Hi, Jasper. So what more can you tell us about what came out of these talks today?
I don't have very much for you either, I'm afraid. Both groups, the Russians and the Ukrainians, are preparing to give press conferences to their journalists. It seems as if the delegations haven't actually left Dolmabahce Palace, which is over there behind that stone wall that you see there. The delegates' cars are still parked outside the palace. So we're in the interregnum between the talks actually finishing and the delegates actually leaving the venue. Now, clearly the talks have not achieved anything, but this was to be expected, because the delegation that the Russians sent along didn't include people who had decision-making powers. The Russian delegation was led by an aide, an advisor to Putin, called Vladimir Medinsky, and his second lieutenant was a deputy foreign minister. On the Ukrainian side, however, the delegation was led by Andrei Umarev, who is a defense minister. And part of the delegation included Andriy Yermak, who is said to be the second most powerful person in Ukraine. He's the head of President Zelensky's presidential office. So the Ukrainians did have people capable of making decisions and concessions to reach a peace deal, but the Russians did not. Now, it looks as if from here we'll have to get to a summit between President Putin and President Trump. Only that will only American pressure on Russia, it seems, would persuade President Putin to send a serious delegation to the peace table, a delegation that is capable of making concessions for peace.
Jasper Mortimer in Istanbul, thank you very much. Well, for some additional analysis then on these latest developments at those talks, our international affairs editor, Angela Diffley, joins me now on set. Hi, Angela. So we heard there from Jasper what little came out of this meeting. What do you make of it?
Yeah, these demands that Ukraine give up control of territory that it does still control before any ceasefire. Well, with all these coordination meetings that went on before the Russians and the Ukrainians sat down, it seems that nobody had an answer to that except to call off the talks immediately, to collapse them and say, we're leaving, those are unacceptable demands. It's clear that the Russians had no intention of these talks going anywhere. These things are very sequential, usually small incremental steps leading to a laying down of arms for a temporary, usually finite amount of time, followed by further talks. You know, Putin knows all of that. This was never intended to go anywhere. And everything now depends on Trump, as he suggested yesterday. Can Zelensky persuade Trump that the Russians are playing him, as so many people have suggested, that the Russians are simply foot-dragging, trying to get as much territory as they can, strengthen their position as much as possible before they make even the smallest concession? Or will Trump and Putin end up sitting down together, and Putin will hope that Trump, who appears to be easily persuaded by the last person he talked to, he will hope that he can persuade Trump. Also, don't forget, just look at the deals that were signed in the Middle East there. Russia has the possibility of mineral deals with the United States, not necessarily just with the United States, but with President Donald Trump. Those lines are increasingly blurred. And Putin might well at some stage come up with an offer that Trump deems to be interesting and get Trump on board. As we've said before, it's very difficult to see just how interested Trump is in Ukraine. Is it just an obstacle in the way, as we've often said, in relations between Moscow and Washington? Where is Europe in all of that? They will try to impose sanctions. As Zelensky said, if Putin is not going to play ball, if he is not serious, then there must be pressure exerted on him. Donald Trump has exerted no pressure on the Russians so far. He has occasionally expressed mild irritation. That is the extent of Trump's pressure on Russia, and there is often background talk of Washington lifting sanctions on Russia, which would completely undermine any other pressure put on Putin by the Europeans.
Now, you said, Angela, that European leaders are absent, at least in Istanbul. They are, for their part, meeting together with Volodymyr Zelensky at that one-day summit in Albania, where the war in Ukraine is obviously at the top of the agenda. Earlier, we heard Volodymyr Zelensky say that European leaders must put maximum pressure on Moscow if these talks indeed prove to be unsuccessful. Emmanuel Macron saying the same thing. So what happens next?
Well, those talks are not just European Union. They are also Britain is there and other countries in the continent of Europe or on the periphery, but not members of the European Union, because many of them are impacted by a number of issues, not just Ukraine, but that is what is on the agenda, at the top of the agenda, as you say, today. The real issue is the European Union cannot itself, let alone this wider grouping, agree on what sort of sanctions should they be on energy. There are implications there for various EU countries. Should they, on the frozen Russian assets, start spending that money? For the moment, they've only spent on the interest from frozen Russian assets. There are countries in favour of that and those against. The idea of boots on the ground created significant unease around the European Union before a number of countries committed and then pulled back from that idea. There is still, unfortunately, an amount of disunity within the European Union, let alone the wider grouping that is meeting in Albania today. So it is very difficult. They are making real progress, but it is going to take such a long time to bear fruit on the idea, which Emmanuel Macron has championed well before the Ukraine war, that Europe needs to have a proper manufacturing defence industry, that it needs to boost it immeasurably, and that it needs to become more or less autonomous. It cannot depend on the United States. NATO needs to have a European pillar that can do an awful lot by itself if NATO continues to exist. All of those things interlinked, of course, but there is no real agreement. On that area, there is significant progress.
Angela Diffley, thank you very much.